Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our 10th episode of Cyber Talks. Today, 24th September 2020, I have the honor to have with us Mr. Iddo Moed, Deputy Head of African, Deputy Head of African Affairs Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Israel. Mr. Moed we're speaking about the future of the future, the race for global digital security. Good morning, Mr. Moed, and thank you for joining us
Hi, good morning.
For this session of the 10th session of Cyber Talks. The floor is yours, and I'll give you a host privilege, and of course you will describe yourself. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much, Tal. Thank you for having me this morning. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy that you joined me this morning for conversation, hopefully, not just a presentation about how diplomacy and politics basically sees the future of the future. So where are things going in the digital domain? A few words about myself. I'm a diplomat and I've been with the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs for almost 30 years. Posted in countries around the world, Dominican Republic, the Netherlands, Singapore, China. And so I've been involved with mainly political issues, less technology, but for the last 7.5 years, I've been heading the cybersecurity department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and very recently moved to African affairs, so back to the political side. But I'm very happy, Tal, for your invitation. Also very honored to be at the 10th anniversary of this series. And so enough about myself. Let's talk about what I would like to share with you this morning, and that's this presentation. So I hope everybody can see it. Just a second, here we are. So what I'd like to do is talk about how technology correlates with politics, and basically how it outpaces politics, because in many ways we know technology develops much faster than policy can really catch up with it. What does it mean? How do people who deal with international relations see that, and what do they do about it? So one part is to talk about politics and technology, then talk about security challenges and solutions, but basically the challenges and what kind of national approaches do we have. Israel as an example, but also we can talk about other countries, how they approach this. So we, from an international relations point of view, we look at the first in the middle, the top middle globe, where we see countries divided by borders. This is based on the Westphalian agreement from 1623 that countries decided, well, that leaders, that kings and so on decided that countries will have borders, have territory, have people. And so the world has been divided in a way as we know it today. But we know also that the world doesn't look only like that. It also has other faces, like the one on the bottom right, where everything is connected with everything all the time, everywhere, anywhere. Either satellites or cables connect the whole world with everything. So we can reach one part of the world without having to cross any kind of physical borders or any kind of borders. We just press a button. At the same time, you also see some kind of fragmentation, and the fragmentation takes place based on activities that are mainly managed by technology companies. So it's the private sector that basically creates divisions of fragmentation in the world according to databases, according to users, and so on and so on. And these multinational companies actually create new entities that affect how the digital domain is managed and how it operates, and also affects how states behave in this domain. When I first started with cybersecurity, sorry, I found this website of Norse. It's one of the cyber companies, quite well known. This one is from, let me just turn this sound off. I think 2015, you can see here on the bottom right. And it's a very basic page that shows potential clients what is happening around the world. So you see packets that are described as malware running from one country to another. You see flags and you see a running table on the right, and you can see that there are all kinds of descriptions for the attacker and what is happening, what kind of malware is running from one place to another. For me, as a diplomat, look at it, it means that there is a constant global war going on. Everybody is shooting at everybody all the time. This one specific video is from an attack on the New Orleans server center that is connected to the New York Stock Exchange. But other than that, all the time, everywhere around the world, you'll see these kind of attacks happening. And so it's quite a worrying situation for people who deal with international relations, and for diplomats specifically. This means that we have to do something, don't we? We ask ourselves, should we do something about this? So, okay, worrying situation. I'll go back and try to look up more information. And I ask Google, who runs the internet? Because I never knew, I never thought about it. But is there one specific entity that runs the internet? Is there a sort of a global organization that runs the internet? And this is the best that I could find. This is a sort of a diagram that was prepared by, I think, a United Nations entity. And it lists about a dozen organizations that deal with managing the internet. Most of them are professional organizations where engineers or other software, people who deal with software, people who deal with telecommunication like ICANN, sit and discuss and decide how the internet is managed. There is hardly any involvement of governments in this operation. This is slowly changing. This may change even further in the future, but up until now, this is more or less the situation as it is. So these are NGOs or professional organizations that are sometimes supported by the United Nations or by some countries at some point, like ICANN was first supported by the United States. But this means, yet again, for me as a diplomat, that something is happening around the world which is extremely important and affects what states are able to do to develop economically and socially and so on. And it's not managed by states. So there is an ongoing kind of a conflict around the world, and there is no real one entity that manages it. There is a sort of a new landscape, and as I described earlier, the world becomes flat in the sense that everything is connected with everything. But when we observe this from a little bit closer, we see a few very significant aspects. First one is that technology is very influential on the world, and that affects the state. When we talk about technology, we basically talk about connectivity. Everything is connected with everything. Data quantity, which is growing exponentially. We know that. We are already very, very familiar with that, but we don't really understand what it means. We'll talk about that, of course, later on when we talk about AI and big data and so on. And availability. All of us, everywhere around the world, also in Africa, are available almost all the time, everywhere. So with this technology, what does it mean to the world, to countries, to states? And in my mind, I observe two significant gaps. The first one is the ideology gap. That means that there are countries that see the development of a digital domain as a threat more than an opportunity, or vice versa. Look at it from a threat point of view means that you want to control the flow of data, the content. You want to make sure that the right information, so-called right information, gets to the people. Other countries that have no real issue with the flow of information say, and there is a mostly democratic country, say we want all the information to be as long as it's legal, of course, to be available all the time to all the people in a safe way. So we just want to make sure that the infrastructure is safe, but we don't manage the content unless it's been specifically designated as illegal, like child pornography. So there's sort of a gap between countries that believe that content should be controlled or not controlled. That's one. The second gap, very significant one, is between countries that have some kind of capacity to deal with the growing digitization around the world and countries that don't. It doesn't go exactly along the line between developed and developing countries, because some developed countries still don't have the capacity and don't fully understand. But as time goes on and progresses, we see that more and more advanced countries understand that they have to deal with the digitization processes around the world and are more and more capable in doing that. And at the same time, countries that are underdeveloped still are lagging behind. And we know that if we want to reach some kind of improved global cyber resilience, for example, we have to make sure that the weakest links are all protected. So these are very significant gaps that have to do with global cybersecurity. The first, on the political gap, is something that we deal with at the political level, diplomats and so on. The other one, the technological level, is more for the private sector, the academia, but also has bearing on international relations. At the state level, we see that security, priorities, national priorities, and capacity are also very much linked to the digitization process and to the fact that the whole world is connected. So actually the state decision-making processes and the allocation of resources, of national resources, is affected by the way that technology advances and develops around the world. But going back to states, we realize basically, and that's the most important part for me, because that's the area where diplomacy is most effective, is that this situation of very fast growing level of connectivity, of data availability, of computerization around the world means that we may need perhaps new norms. And that connects with a political gap, because some countries feel that we need some kind of a new global treaty, and some countries say we don't need a treaty, we have enough tools, and so on. And this also goes to the discussion that I'll elaborate on a little bit later about control of content versus control over security of the infrastructure. But at this point, it's important for me to point out to you that the discussion about norms involves both states and non-states entities. States understand that there should be state has to behave responsibly in the global scene, which means we have to abide by international law. But we, as I mentioned earlier, we have also the technology companies that actually create the digital domain. How do they link with this environment? What kind of commitment do they take upon themselves? So we'll discuss that as well. Back to foreign relations and the idea of the main notion of diplomacy as building bridges and actually facilitating, connecting. I like to share with you one of the biggest challenges, and that you'll see that it's epitomized in this caricature at the bottom, where on the left you'll see the technologist, and on the right you'll see somebody who can be also a diplomat. Technologist wants to get from A to B. It's a straight line. It's either you get there or you don't. You either solve the problem or you don't. A diplomat has to go through a whole process of compromising, of changing his way, of looking at things in a different way, building coalitions and so on. And this gap is very evident when we're talking about cyber diplomacy, because when you're trying to bridge technical gaps, diplomats and technologists have a hard time to work together. So we understand that technology impacts international relations very much. I mentioned that earlier. And we know that we want to strengthen global security, but we also want to work on global stability. And stability is a sort of a diplomatic term for keeping things as they are at the moment. It may not be ideal, but we don't want to make things worse. So that's stability. And in many ways, we want to prevent what Karl von Clausewitz, this Prussian general, said about war. It's continuation of diplomacy by other means. So we certainly want to avoid that. The problem is that when we're talking about cyber, for example, we're not sure that we're talking about the same thing. So this Montego from The Little Princess used to say this, you keep saying that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means. I use this for cyber. We're not sure when I'm talking about cyber if my colleague in another part of the world understands the same vocabulary that I'm using. So who are the players in this domain? And I mentioned them actually going through our first few minutes. There's a private sector. Here is Brad Smith, who is the CEO, used to be the CEO of Microsoft and chief legal counsel. In the middle, this is the United Nations Assembly in Vienna, and on the right, these are the bad guys. So we have three kinds of players that are effective in this domain. I'll focus mostly on the national level and states, but I'll also say a few words about the others. So at the national level, we have quite a few gaps. One is how we deal with cybercrime. There is no, there is no global treaty to mitigate or to cooperate in cybercrime. There is the Cybercrime Convention. It's called the Budapest Convention. But only 60 or perhaps even close to 70 countries are a member of it. The European Union has some regulations put in place, but this is only for the European Union. On the political level, so government to government, G2G, there is some cooperation, but it's limited. It's based on trust and based on a lot of other foundations of collaboration between countries on security collaborations and so on. There is, however, something that I call cross-pollination of some ideas that stem from regional organizations like the Organization of American States or the OECD or the Organization for Security and Economic Cooperation in Europe. These ideas float in other organizations as well once they become more mature, and I'll talk about that also in a minute. And sometimes there are blocks of countries, and we know that the non-aligned movement or the European Union, they tend to cooperate more and better than among themselves and with other countries. On the security level, we're not sure what deterrence means. Deterrence has a lot of aspects and facets in cybersecurity. It has to do with attributing a cyber attack, very hard to do because you have to produce some kind of evidence to connect a specific state with a specific attack. And there are some sanctions that one country or several countries can put in place to, as we call, impose costs on specific players. So they will be not able to make financial transactions or whatever, or move around in the world, will not be able to enter several countries and so on. On the intelligence level, it's hard because the cooperation is based on non-disclosure agreements. If they exist, it's easier. If they don't, it's more complicated. And on alliances, specific alliances between countries. And at technology level, there is the issue of capacity building that I mentioned earlier, the technical gap that exists between countries, and also the idea that we actually lack in many ways common technological basis if we don't do sufficient research and development cooperation. We basically are working in different directions, although it may seem clear that if you want to protect critical infrastructure like the electric grid, doing specific research on that may require among countries, that would require much more cooperation than inside a country, because you have to understand each other's grids and terminology and so on. So this is a gap that still needs to be dealt with. There's also the fact that cyber politics has to do with different aspects of cybersecurity. So One is the political aspect of control versus control of the content versus infrastructure that I mentioned earlier. Another aspect is countering violent extremism or anti-Semitism. These are aspects that also have to do with the digital domain, but in one country may be described as one set of actions that are forbidden or considered illegal, in other countries in a different way. Or some countries don't even describe anti-Semitism, for example, as illegal. So there is a dilemma. How do you deal with that? How do you incorporate issues that have to do with content within cyber? And how do you collaborate on that? And there is the international regulation, which is part of the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, which is actually a United Nations organization dealing with telecommunication, not with cyber, has a lot of political activity in it. So should it be more involved in cybersecurity, less involved? That's a dilemma that countries contemplate. Same is for ICANN, the organization that is responsible for allocating the domain names. It's not political, there are no countries involved in it, but some aspects of what they do have political meaning, even if it's about discussing allocating .amazon to specific organizations, if the Amazon is a geographical area or Amazon is a commercial company. Then there is a difference in countries' approach to cybersecurity. Some countries, the military is responsible, some countries, the civilian organization is responsible. How do you collaborate across the border between civilian and military? And then there is the non-state actors that may come up with some very interesting ideas how norms should be devised for cybersecurity. So there are the non-state actors as well. So from Israeli point of view, we want to say that although cyber is very important and the digital domain is very important, there are other topics that we deal with that are very significant to take into consideration. First of all, arms control. So international treaties and mechanisms to control the flow of anything that has to do with security around the world. Same applies for export control policies. Counterterrorism. Cyber and terrorism, of course, are sometimes related. So how does that relate to cybersecurity? How does public diplomacy relate to it when it comes to content? And how do we deal with other emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, like 5G, like quantum computing and more? From Israel's point of view, we have a sort of a unique geopolitical environment. So we more or less know how to streamline all this diplomatic activity around the developing digital threat. But each country has a different approach. And that goes back to the fact that there are some gaps. At the end of the day, what we want to do is to build confidence between countries so they can work better together. So we have to build trust, we have to build capabilities, and we want to make sure that we are on the same value level. And that's basically quite easy, but as I mentioned just now, it takes a lot of effort to create that kind of confidence building, and which I mentioned earlier. And last but not least, if you look at the right-hand side of this, the World Summit of Information Societies, WSIS, WSIS process, this is to highlight that the United Nations realized at some point that indeed technology is very important for global development, and so the United Nations should be more focused on what is happening there. But how does that translate to improving security? We're not sure yet, because it's very complicated to move from there. And the knowledge that, for example, as you can see on the left-hand side, that we have more than 100 mobile phones per 100 people around the world. How do we move from there to improving security and resilience at the United Nations level? That's hard to tell, but there are efforts made by the Secretary General of the United Nations also to be part of states' responsibility in the digital domain. but we're not out of the woods yet. There is no clear policy. These are just example of what works in the domain, just to give you an idea of some forms of cooperation, the political, military, technology, and cybersecurity organizations. So there is definitely a lot of cooperation going on. But as I mentioned, there are big gaps between countries. So a lot of work to be done there to enhance our global approach to digital security. So I mentioned Brad Smith earlier as a representative of the private sector. And he's interesting because Microsoft came up with an idea for a cyber digital Geneva Convention. And this digital or cyber Geneva Convention, the idea was that states will explicitly take more responsibility upon themselves to do or not do some things, not to abuse the technology and so on. It's an interesting idea, but if the private sector is interested, then private sector should take also some part of the responsibility. So there is some kind of a discussion about this, not really serious. I mean, in the form that countries want to adopt the idea, but what's important here to note is that there are joint initiatives between government and the private sector, and there are government incentives for the private sector to be part of security and to devise solutions for protecting critical infrastructure or the election systems and things that are of high value to society and not always have a very significant commercial value in and by themselves. So the gap between state and private sector is that one, private sector has a difficult time assuming responsibility because they have different stakeholders. They're the shareholders, not the public. Second is government don't want them to be too responsible, but want to work together with them, even if it doesn't affect the bottom line as they would like it to take place. And the third is that the private sector should be also open to support the government's efforts to enhance security. These are things that work quite interestingly in Israel. Perhaps we'll touch on that in a few minutes. And to highlight what I mentioned earlier, this process where we have this, what we call the multi-stakeholder model, you have this diagram here where you have different actors, so states, international organizations such as the United Nations or non-state actors like Microsoft. All of them are taking part in different fora. So they meet in different places and discuss things. And what they create is processes like cooperation frameworks or capacity building or any kind of understanding, principle understanding, and create dialogues and create actions. And this process is sort of parallel worlds that are moving around, sometimes meet, sometimes don't. But that's the world as we know it. And as states, you have to understand that even if you want to affect the environment and you want to make a more secure environment for your country, for your society, it's not as easy as it seems because there are many multinational players and there are many aspects that are not exactly in hands of one specific country. So you have to work with a lot of players and you have to be able to open the table for discussion to many players. Last and least important, but they're not least important, are the bad guys. So the bad guys, what we can tell about them is that the available tools for them the sophistication level rises all the time. At the same time, the requirements to use them, to apply them, goes down significantly. And therefore, we should be expecting more sophisticated attacks as time progresses. And actually, we see that. This is a diagram from 2013, mind you, but it lists potential threats from technology and the ease to use it. And that's, if you can read it on a vertical line, that's how severe the potential security threat may be. And then the horizontal is how easy it is to use. And there are all different kinds of technologies that are, of course, very available right now, just to highlight the sense that the threat is very evident, but the gaps between countries and between countries in the private sector are very significant yet. So back to Israel. How do we approach this? What do we do? The Israeli approach is first to look, of course, at our local security and make sure that our security is the highest level possible. We then look at the global agenda and we try to see in what way Israel can be a leader in technology, in research, in any other area. And so we try to show that our ecosystem basically may serve as a source of inspiration, but also work in a way that can work more or less similarly with other countries. So every country looks at the challenges in cyber the same way, political, the economic damage, public awareness, and so on. In Israel, our model is that we have a Prime Minister's office where the Israel National Cyber Directorate is located, and we have a lot of ministries or departments around it that work together. And this works very closely with the private sector, with the academia, to create what we see today comes up, what results in the fact that we have around 420 Israeli companies, about over 100 that were acquired. So it's far over 500 Israeli companies, basically a very fast growing market share. A lot of multinational companies that are setting up their research and development centers here, and a very fast growing share of global investments in cybersecurity. And it also benefits Israeli economy very much. And Prime Minister Netanyahu mentions that very often, the fact that Israel has such a strong technological advantage in cybersecurity means also that the revenues from continuing to develop this sector will continue to flow into Israeli economy. And that's, of course, also in line with the fact that Israel is the highest, ranks first in terms of investing in R&D per capita among OECD countries. A few words about Israeli investments in the infrastructure. So this is a drawing of what would be at some point the Be'er Sheva ecosystem, cyber park. So it's the university, Ben Gurion University at the bottom right, with the hospital, which is also part of cybersecurity research, by the way, in healthcare. The industry, which is located on the left with the government CERT, the Computer Events Response Team, and the IDF that is going to be located in this very close vicinity within the coming few years. So you'll see that not only are these different players put in the same geographical vicinity, but over time you'll see rotation of young people going from school to university to the military, probably in this area, then going to the university, and then going into industry, all in the same geographical location. And this rotation of people among the different parts of the ecosystem also is a very significant contributor to Israel's leading role in development of solutions in cybersecurity. So going back to what is happening around the world, we see that along with cyber, new technological developments become more and more prevalent and are being used. So it's artificial intelligence that is already used very often, and we're talking about transportation, automotive transportation, and we talk about a lot of solutions for cybersecurity, also from the AI, the use of big data for solving problems that have to do with healthcare, have to do with consumer issues. A lot of issues that are being analyzed and handled in a much, let's say, smarter way than in the past, because big data processing has become so advanced. Quantum computing, these are just examples of new technologies that have global bearing. All these issues have to be somehow standardized. All these issues have to be regulated on an international level. And also at the same time, as I mentioned, international research and development is extremely important. So standardizing by itself is easy. We have ISO, so that's sort of global standard, but there are also a lot of other standards that are required that are not dealt with by ISO. The regulation, well, the European Union, I think, is the broadest group of countries, the largest group of countries that can agree on international regulation. Very hard to achieve that on a global level. And R&D, as I mentioned, is very hard to achieve as well. And with COVID-19, I think another issue was very much highlighted, and that is the supply chain security. So not only from cybersecurity point of view, but also when we're talking about producing technology. So the availability of rare earth for production of chips, and the production of sophisticated boards for any kind of products, the fact that they may be manufactured in countries where all of a sudden there is a larger demand may be bought, a larger supply may be bought by another country, as we saw in COVID-19, when medical equipment was all of a sudden going all over the place because different clients were competing for the same product. That may also apply to the digital domain. And on top of that, there is a sort of a struggle for technological supremacy between countries as a national policy. So all of that together means that on a global level, those who are dealing with international relations, diplomats, politicians, and so on, these kind of developments have a very strong impact. I can tell you from my perspective, looking at international organizations during the COVID-19 pandemic now, is that we do try to understand what are the implications for our ongoing discussions. And we do see that the operational collaboration grows because people understand and organizations understand that you have to work together quickly and faster. So during this period, we see that there is stronger operational collaboration in mitigating advanced attacks against healthcare institutions. There is offline collaboration, how to deal with the challenges that have to do with COVID-19 in technological terms. And there's political cooperation as well, information sharing, talking about deterrence, so perhaps attributing cyber attacks to specific players, or even not doing that, but coming together as alliances and saying, well, this will not be tolerated. It's happened with the Czech Republic attacks in March and April. Medical institutions were attacked at the time, and so the United States and European countries and Australia, I think, came up and said this, and Israel as well, came up and said, we will not tolerate attacks on medical institutions because this may risk human lives. So COVID-19 strengthened the collaboration, but we also understand that the weight of the threat has grown, which means the damage potential of the threat is growing as well with time progressing and during this difficult period of global vulnerability, medical vulnerability. So in the future, we do see that the government-to-government collaboration will grow, because we do feel that countries understand that because of the new challenges in technology and the threats that emanates from this domain, we have to be working together more intimately. We have to share more information. We have to build this kind of trust that I mentioned before. Business-to-government collaboration is extremely important, but it has to be tailor-made, and it has to provide cutting-edge solutions, make it more difficult for any adversary to manipulate technologies for on their behalf. Deterrence has to be perhaps discussed further. Either it's demanding, attributing costs, imposing costs on the adversaries, or strengthening the defense. Whatever it may be, deterrence has to be strengthened, because we see that attackers are doing their work in a more aggressive way. And the question about universal agreements will remain, because some countries believe that that will be the solutions, and other countries say, like Israel, for example, keep your eyes on the ball, look at the threat, mitigate the threat. I mean, talking about it is interesting, but we want to have defend, not just talk about it. So I will stop here, and thank you all for your attention. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you. Back to you, Tom.
Yes, I have a question. Can we hear you, or we need English? My broken English.
Broken English.
Try English.
Yeah, try English.
I will try. Okay. I think I want to ask you what you think happened, and when the connection and all the countries start to do something, in your point of view.
You mean when is the point that countries will work more closely together? That's the question?
Yes.
I think that when the threat becomes clearer, countries understand that they have to act. That's always the case. So now with COVID-19 and the cyber attack that took place in April that I mentioned, countries realized this may happen everywhere. So if we don't act on that, we may risk even more attacks coming in. That's one thing. The second thing is that countries realize that their that their vulnerability is or their exposure to risk is still but is big or evident enough to realize that if you don't work together, you hang together. So that's also a sort of a catalyst to work. You understand that you are very vulnerable, so you know that you have to work with others to be able to strengthen your defense.
I ask you this because, you know, as cybersecurity, 20 years and more, I thought about this a long time ago. So I give you an example about Israel. I don't understand why is like when you open cellular, they ask you today in the template how you want SMS for advertising, how you can call to 1-900, that's phone that call money. So I thought the same when you have ISP contract, automatically, I know it costs them some money, so you pay a lot more, 10 shekel or something, $5, not matter what. And automatically you are, they have IPS and mail, that what the simple thing that they can check. So it's can, if you have IoT or small business that no understand about security, okay, you have detect the noise low. So nothing is 100%, but it take very, very low the noise of the regular attack. And me and Tal, maybe you, we said we don't want to pay you, and we want porno, sex, viruses, and everything, because this is my job and I want contact and what to do. But when the default is block, you know, most of the people don't change the default. So it's more, and I don't understand why they didn't do it until now. It's and I see this is one of the only way they can do something to take, you know, all the problem with DDoS and everything about IoT and many that people don't know, you know, they don't know they have a problem at all.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, because sometimes these very small amounts of commercial gain if you give that up, you can increase security very much. I absolutely agree with you, but this has to come both from the companies as well as from governments, that the stronger security settings will be applied and not leaving default vulnerabilities. I absolutely agree.
Yeah,
and you take into consideration that there's so many organizations that even if they are aware of cyber risks, they're also vulnerable, and they also do
sure,
some
but
silly things.
You need to take the noise. People ask me what to do, why to use viruses with signature. That actually today it's very old, but they are. This you are sure you take most of the 100% the bet. Okay, now you have the other ATP and other things. I think what I understand for many is the problem is the FCC in the start. Where it's like you have a telephone company. They say you not need to hear what the people talk, and you're not charge of this. And it's like deep security today here. Yeah. So what happened? I think it's all political. It's more the technology is in the end, and no technology can fix all this without any political.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. You're absolutely right in this, Moshe, because if you want to be, it's the question that countries have to ask themselves. You want to increase security, or you want to allow some kind of whatever. The question is really, how do you have any kind of discussion about these things in parliament or not? And if there is a discussion, then I'm sure there will be a better solution. But even if the politicians are not interested, then that's the situation we have. Yeah,
I think in this year we are very, very close to bad. What happened in this year can maybe change something.
Yeah, well, hopefully.
Okay, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, if we have enough time, Iddo, I have one question. I know that you are in a hurry. You've mentioned, I was glad that you mentioned the COVID-19 and coronavirus pandemic. And I would like to, you've mentioned activities being made currently during this year. And I wanted to ask you about, what do you think will be, let's call it, the cyber diplomacy consequences or implications or results from the COVID-19 era, which means what will be perhaps new regulations or new norms, or how will the coronavirus era will influence the cyber diplomacy or cyber norms in this cyber space, cyber domain?
Great question. I can think of a few things. Welcome. One is that we have to continue the discussion on cyber norms from a distance. Doing that for diplomats is difficult because most of our discussions are informal. So you don't have the opportunity to discuss things informally, and so you have to try to reach agreements straight around the table where everybody's talking in a formal way. That's more complicated. So it's more difficult to understand each other and to reach agreement. That's one. Second is, we all understand that the vulnerability of the healthcare sector is very, very important. And so we have to deal with that. So we may have to point and pay more attention to strengthening cybersecurity and digital security around the healthcare sector. We all understand this has also international implications. So in terms of what kind of responsibility of the states are to each other, how do we agree on standards and so on. So the healthcare issue is very strongly highlighted now. And the third thing on the longer term, I think, will be that we will understand that, that technology has such far-reaching influence over a global well-being that we have to come up with a form of improving the way we communicate, improving the way we discuss what we want to achieve together. So now we do a lot of Zooms and things like that. I think we'll have to think about some kind of improved mechanism in the new normal reality of Zooms and things like that, and come up with an improved way, more effective way of discussing such important issues as cybersecurity in the future or in the present, given the restrictions of COVID-19, the lack of movement, the fact that you don't have the ability to talk face-to-face with people and so on. So things will change in the future also in diplomacy in that sense, if that's the question, for sure.
Thank you, Iddo. Yael, Eitan, someone like to ask something? I guess.
No, thank you.
Any law?
Very interesting.
Sorry.
Pardon, Yael?
No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that it's really interesting, and thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. Pleasure.
Yael?
I wanted to ask if there is any law that exists right now that everyone has in common and that they can share, or is there anything that's sort of like a base?
The base is criminal collaboration in terms of mitigating cybercrime. Cybercrime is basically 95% of what is happening around the world. The malign activity in cyber is 95% cybercrime. And there is a lot that happens there, but there is no universal cyber agreement of any kind. So the Budapest Convention I mentioned earlier, it's less than 70 countries. And other than that, it's just international law, how countries deal with each other. Nothing specific to cyber. I don't think we need one. We need to understand how existing laws apply in cyber, which is a different thing. So we have to look at the different law aspects and see that how they apply. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you very much, Iddo Moed, for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
At the 10th edition of Cyber Talk. So once again, Iddo Moed, Deputy Head of African Affairs Division, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel. Thank you so much, and please join us next week for the talk of Mr. Shai Simkin, Global Head of Cyber at Hoden Insurance. It will relate not to diplomatic and cyberspace, but another aspect of insurance and cyberspace. So thank you very much. Thank you, Iddo. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone.
Take care and stay healthy. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.